Okay, everyone, welcome back to the How to Podcast series. I have a guest with me today who's been on another podcast called Dad Space, and he's back. Hey, I didn't scare him away. He came back, and that makes me happy. And he's joining me from the other side of the world in the future, which is always cool. But Doug is here with me today to talk about his podcast, to talk podcasting and encourage you, as a listener, to start or grow your show. Doug, welcome to the How to Podcast series. Great to see you again.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, good to be back. Good to be back with you.
So behind the scenes, Doug and I had a scheduled meeting set up, and Doug let me off the hook because just before my meeting with Doug, I became a grandfather and I had to scoot out to the hospital, and Doug was gracious enough to reschedule. So Doug, thank you for allowing me the joy of being at the hospital for that. And as a father and grandfather, you know that feeling. So tell everybody a little bit about where you are and a little bit about your family. I'd like to start there.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it was a pleasure that day, Dave, because first time being a grandfather, it's just like you had to go and do that one.
Right.
Yeah, I'm in Australia. I live in a little place called the Gold Coast, which is on the east coast, pretty much halfway from top to bottom. I'm in my late 50s. I got 4 adult sons who are amazing, beautiful wife of almost this in another week or two of 39 years. And,
wow.
And I started podcasting probably nearly 2 years ago. At the urgence of my 4 adult sons, just because I love talking. They're like, Dad, you just got to sit down and just start talking to random people and recording it. Yeah.
And that's how it started.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
Tell us about your podcast.
It started out as, I called it Conversations with Doug. And then after a while, I specifically at the time when I started it, I was halfway through a 1-year class on becoming an intuitive life coach. So I changed the name to Intuitive Conversations with Doug. And for the last 6 months or so, it's really been aimed at helping men to develop their intuition.
And we talked about this on Dad Space, that you usually hear the word intuition accompanied with the word women's intuition, which I know my wife has superb intuition. We don't hear it as often for men. So before we jump into podcasting topics, can you kind of unpack a little bit about what your podcast speaks to then?
Well, probably 35 years ago, I heard an ancient saying that was written probably 150 years ago that most men live lives of quiet desperation. And that sort of rocked me to my core when I read that. I thought, oh, God. And I had several men in my life at that time who I just suddenly thought of when I read that. And I thought that's exactly the lives they're living, lives of quiet desperation. And then as the years have gone on, I've started to find I've had probably 6 years ago, things changed in my life for the better, and I started to develop my own intuition. But it was a language I couldn't understand. I was receiving information, and it was like I'd landed in a foreign country at times. And I then went on a journey to start to understand what the information was. And I've just found that my life has improved like multiple times by being able to tap into this sixth sense, this extra little superpower of information. And my hope is that I can help men just make one better decision a day so that their lives are just a bit better. They come home, they kick the cat one less time. They, they smile at their wife and children when they arrive home rather than, the opposite. And the ripple effect of that just will make a better world.
Yeah, I love it. I love your podcast. I love everything about it. I'm listening and enjoying it. It's really, really an interesting show to jump into, and you really are addressing something that we don't talk about a lot as men.
Yeah. So
congratulations on doing that, and keep going on that. I love listening to your show. So
thanks, Doug.
It's exciting.
Yeah,
it's amazing. So your podcast journey, has it all been flowers and roses and rainbows? Has it been easy for you from day one?
I've had days where it's been like that, and I've had other days where, I'm trying to think, probably it was around Easter this year. So we're in 2023. When was Easter? Like March, April, somewhere around there.
April, yeah.
I had a dark night of the soul moment with my podcast, and really the first time. And I literally didn't put an episode out for about 5 or 6 weeks. And one of my adult sons rang me, and I was like, oh, hi, a bit of a casual conversation. And then it was like, oh, how's your podcast going, Dad? And I said, oh, da, da. And he goes, oh, yeah, I kind of was driving in the car the other day, and I thought, oh, I'll put Dad on, see what he's been yakking about lately. And there was no new episodes. And so, he gave me some wise counsel, and he said, Dad, I'm if you think I'm being tough on you, I'm just saying to you what you would have said to me. And I said, I know, I get it. And so I, slapped myself around it. Just self-doubt, imposter syndrome, those sort of things.
Really?
Just a lot of different things, just thinking like nothing that I'm saying is really worthwhile out there. And I was down on myself, and I don't get like that very often. And in my podcast, I'm constantly helping men to overcome that. But
right.
That and other things that have happened in my life, I do teach people. I do 2 days a week. I used to be a professional firefighter, and I teach fire safety training. And part of that, I teach people how to remain calm. But, once every couple of years, I have a situation that gets really stressful for me, and I struggle to remain calm. And I've talked it out with a few different people, and it's really helpful for me to have some bad moments, because then I can empathize with people. So it's like, like my podcast was going really nice, and then I just had these self-doubts come in, and then it's like, well, if, I'm talking to someone else, or I'm talking on my podcast about how I'm feeling, and I'm feeling inadequate, or like, who am I to talk about this subject? I can relate and go, yeah, I've been there. Like I've had that problem, and this is how I overcame it. So it's, yeah.
Did you have this conversation with your audience on your podcast after kind of coming through these dark days?
No, I haven't yet. I haven't, because I've had prior to that, my podcasts were probably 2/3 me talking on my own for 20 minutes about all sorts of various topics around developing men's intuition, and the other third were interviewing people. But since then, I've pulled my finger out so much that every podcast since then has been an interview with somebody. So I haven't really had the one-on-one, just me, my time to sit and talk to my audience about, a little dark cloud that came over, and what sort of went on.
Because I think that brings humanity back to you as a host with your audience as well. And I know I've done this in my shows where something's just pressing, something's happening in my life, and beyond being the host of a podcast, I'm also a human being living my experience, right? And I just put them out as like a bonus episode outside of my normal release, and it just pops up on my listener's phone, and they're like, well, what's this? That's different. Dave doesn't normally release on this day. What's this about?
Yeah.
Right. And I just make it outside of the numbered episodes that I have in my release schedule. And like I got on and just talked about, being a grandfather, and, baby Delilah's been born. I'm like, maybe someone in my audience would be really interested to know that I didn't even know Dave had kids, or now he's a grandfather. Like, it's just a little glimpse into who I am as a host.
Mm-hmm.
And then back to the regularly scheduled episodes.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, no, great. That's great advice. Yeah. Like and I have actually thought of throwing an extra episode in. But I guess I haven't wanted to put that pressure on myself, because I hear some people starting new podcasts and they go, I'm going to put out 2 episodes a week. And I'm like, oh, okay, what else do you do? Do you have a job? Do you do this? And I'm like, right. Yeah, good luck. Yeah. Good luck keeping that up consistently. So, exactly. And that, I guess, the listeners, that's a thing. Cause it's like, well, if I'm going to do a 20-minute episode, I could I do one every day? Could I, and Dave, I've never met anyone like you, that you've got 7 different podcasts. It's just like, and like you were telling me before we had turned this on, that you're running 2 or 3 episodes a week of this one, let alone your other podcasts that are totally unrelated to this one. I don't know how you do it, but it's I guess that's a
coffee.
question.
It's all coffee,
right?
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
And here's a point that one way that I've up until now I've only done audio, but I'm right on the edge of starting to put my stuff out on YouTube as well. And here's a little thing for the listeners. My adult sons, they vary from 22 to 37, and they all have specific skill sets that I don't have. And one of them used to do sound recording and everything, and another one of them is a professional videographer. So the sound recording guy, he got me set up the professional videographer, he made me an intro and an outro, and had them like the little files. And then my other son, he grabbed hold of those, and I use GarageBand. And I had no experience in it prior to podcasting, but it was sitting on my computer. They're sitting there. Let's use this. So he set me up these little steps, and I click on step 1, and there's a blank, so I can sit there and talk. And if I click step 2, then the intro and the outro and background music are already there. And then I just drag the file in and pop it in and cut it to length and slide the outro along, bang. And the time saving for that, if I've got an idea in my head of what the podcast's going to be about, and it's just me talking for 20 minutes, 60 minutes later, I leave the room and the podcast is 100% done. So I've talked for 20 minutes, waffled, and I can do that. Usually I do it on 1 or 2 takes. If in the first 30 to 40 seconds I stumble, I'll stop and delete and start again, and then I just waffle on for 20 minutes, and then I get that thing and I drop it in the little thing that my son set up for me, adjust the length, just slide the thing, bang, save. And while that's saving, I go on to the host platform thing, and I'm starting to type in what the episode was about. I'm making some artwork on Canva. Boom, 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 boom. And the longest thing it takes there is to upload the file. That can take 10 minutes to upload the audio file. And boom. And then within an hour, I literally left the room and I've done my podcast for the week. So I guess me saying before, good luck trying to do 2 a week, I guess it's the content that I'm talking about, coming up with, well, what am I going to talk about, or who am I going to interview? And Dave, I'd love to talk to you about that, who you're going to interview. Where do you source all your people from?
Well, one of my podcasts is called Living the Next Chapter. It's an author podcast. I'm not an author. So to get my first 10 episodes of that podcast was hard because I don't know a lot of authors. Again, I'm not an author. So why would I have an author podcast? I like reading, and I like meeting great authors and hearing the story behind their books. So for that one, I like to put my efforts into every guest 100% so that they walk away from the interview going, that was one of the best episodes, because I'm a naturally curious person. So I want to know more beyond just the book that they wrote, but them as a person and the story behind it. I just interviewed someone yesterday. She lost her husband when she was 30 and he was 29. Tragically, just instant, lost her husband. And she came on and I asked her a question and she said, that's a very interesting question. I've never talked to this outside of my therapist.
Wow.
She said, but I really would like to talk about this. This is good. This is good timing to talk about this.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, no, she's never in her community, her family, her friends, she's never addressed that question before. Yeah. And she did it on my podcast. And I'm like, so that's what I like to do, is create moments.
Yes.
And what happens is my guest leaves going, that was a good interview, a good experience with Dave. Here's 5 people that I would suggest to come on your show.
Nice.
And I'll make connections for you. So my list of guests just keeps growing. And then when a podcast promoter and an agency finds you and they're really good at what they do, they start sending you their pool of authors and guests. So they just come in and they're pre-set up and it's really easy. And the one thing I heard from them was they really liked my website in that I have a direct calendar link for a pre-interview already on my website. They don't have to reach out to me and ask me for the link.
Right.
It's right there on the website.
Yep.
So it's very easy for a PR agency to get in touch with me and schedule something without having to talk to me.
Right.
So that really works well. So it's all word of mouth, basically, is how I'm finding my guests.
So are you, like the lady, did you ask her, do you know any other authors who'd like to come on, or did she say it?
Sometimes, yeah, especially if they're new, like brand new, and I've just first time meeting them. I do ask that once in a while, but I also put it into my episode.
Yeah.
So my outro, I have random outros that I do. So like go to my Facebook page, and then the next one would be go to my website, and then the next one would be, hey, if you're an author and you want to start a podcast, reach out to me. I'd love to help you start a podcast. So I have these different versions of my outro.
Yep.
And one of them is just, if you know an author that you would like to have on the show. And what I do is I say to my audience, if there's an author that you love and you would love to hear them on my podcast, tell me who they are. I'll reach out to them on your behalf as a listener of the show. And if you could send me some questions just from you that you want me to ask your favorite author when they do appear.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be like, well, Doug asked me to have you on, author A.
Yeah.
So author A, this is for Doug. Doug has these 6 questions that he wants me to ask you. Doug, here's your questions. Question number 1 to author A from Doug. Doug wants to know. So now Doug is part of my podcast.
Yeah.
He set it up. He suggested the guest, and the guest is there because one of their fans requested them to be on the show. So there's already this built-in excitement about being on the podcast because Doug set it up as a listener.
That's brilliant.
So that's pretty interesting.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's time saving for you. You're not sitting there using mental energy to work out who to come on. And I guess like one thing that I read and was sort of like setting up a podcast is have a niche. And, you know, with your author one is a niche. So mine, like, you know, it was conversations with Doug and it was about helping people. But then I thought, you know, I need to niche this down more. And I'm thinking, well, I'm going to go to men. So I just knocked half the population out. And now I'm going to go to men who want to develop their intuition. And I'm thinking, wow, I just knocked a huge chunk of the population. So I had to have a very niche little market. And so honestly, I've only been contacted once by a random person that did not know me that specifically started to look up men's intuition and asked to be interviewed by me. It's usually me reaching out to others. I've had other people that I've known or that sort of thing through whatever sort of social scene asked to interview me. But there was some sort of connection there. But I have only had one random person because, like, if you release a book, some people, like you say, do hire PR firms. So they're out looking. Whereas I don't think there's too many men out hiring PR firms, like looking for wanting to talk about men's intuition. There's not hundreds of men who've just written a book about intuition who are like, let's find a men's intuition podcast to go on. That, and look, I just believe in that. I'm ahead of my time. I believe in 5 to 25 years' time, it'll be a thing. And here's an example. My son, who gave me wise counsel, he gave me this example. He said, Dad, do you remember 6 years ago, I asked you to come with me and hear this guy speak, and you just said, you are insane. I will never go near this. Now, there's a guy from Poland called Wim Hof. He's in his 60s. They call him the Iceman. And he's like climbed Mount Everest in a pair of shorts. He goes in ice baths all the time. So he studied the physical benefits and the psychological benefits of going in ice baths. And he does this particular type of breathing. Now, at that time, I had just moved back from living 350 miles north of the equator for 12 years, where the ocean temperature's 82 degrees all year. And I was a scuba instructor. So I'm into warm water. And now my son wants me to go somewhere and talk with ice baths. Well, 6 years later, guess what I'm now doing, Dave? Half an hour before this podcast, I made a booking for my wife and I to go for a place where we've been going to for 6 months. We're having a sauna And after the sauna, we're hopping in the ice baths. Now, yesterday morning when I woke up, I put on this guy Wim Hof's 10-week course that I'm doing, and it's talking all about like breathing. So I'm doing all these different radical breathing exercises. And the amount of people, like my son, when he went to hear this guy 6 years ago, 20 people turned up. And we've got a city of, say, 750,000 people, 20 people turned up. If that guy came to this city today, there would be 1,000 people come to the room for sure, like in my little town. Easy. Like he was just ahead of his time 6 years ago. So I look at men's intuition development that way. And I don't know whether in 5 years' time or 25 years' time, but so my little niche, I have to be patient. And I'll say that to the listeners. If you niche down your podcast, because you'll never be everything to everybody. So,
right.
But if you do choose to really niche it down, you might have to be patient if you want to reach a lot of people, or otherwise you're going to have a big vision of ripple effects on a pond to keep your own self-motivation to keep this, because you're thinking you might start looking up. And here's a question for you, Dave. I know the answer from me is, how often do you look at the statistics of how often your podcasts are being listened to? Is it something you look at often or not?
In the early days, I probably was obsessed because I'm so excited about what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. And I think that's okay. It's okay to watch those numbers roll in. There's going to be times for new podcasters where you're going to see 5 listens and you're like, 5 people who are not at my family reunions listens to my show, and they're in countries I've never heard of, and that's exciting. You need to celebrate that, right? Yeah. You know, I'm fine with that, and I know some people will tell you not to look at your stats, but I think it's motivation sometimes, and you're going to need that for those days when you don't feel like doing this. Mm-hmm. It's kind of nice to look down and go, "Wow, there's actually people listening to my show." Yeah. What I like to do is always like to compare myself to myself, though, because when I go into a community event or a Facebook group, and I'm there with my numbers in my head of how I think I'm doing. And then somebody strolls in and they have millions of listens and it seems effortless for them. And you're like, and I listen to their show and it's really not that amazing to me as a listener. I wouldn't listen to it myself, but apparently they're the thing. And you kind of get a little demotivated when you hear that because it seems so easy for some people and so hard for me. Yeah. And it's okay to look at your numbers and be inspired, but don't let them be the obsession that brings you down if you don't see hundreds of thousands of listens after episode 2. Yeah. You know, it's going to take time, right?
For sure. Oh, yeah. I get that one. Yeah, yeah.
And jumping back to your niche conversation as well, like I have the Dad Space podcast designed for men. And you were on there. Thank you for being on there. Dad Space is designed for men, and I'm specifically talking to guys, to dads. Yeah. And a bulk of my audience are female.
Really?
Yeah. So when we say niching down, people get nervous because they want to talk to everyone. They don't want to be just one segment of the population or one area. They want to be available to everybody. Yep. You can talk to everyone. Like everyone's invited to come to your podcast. It's not like there's going to be somebody at the door checking to see if you have a pass to come to the show. Everyone can listen to your podcast.
That's right.
That's the beauty of podcasting. But I'm going to talk to this area, this group of people, but anyone can come. Anyone can come. So I'm talking to men. I'm bringing on great guests like yourself, but there's a big portion of my audience are female. And that brings me joy because they're finding value in my content, even though I'm not specifically speaking to them directly. They're finding value in the conversation we're having, whether they're learning how to maybe work with their husband. Maybe their husband's not interested in podcasts. Maybe they're a single mother with boys and they're trying to figure out path in life. There's something about the content that brings them back. Yeah. So everyone's welcome, but niche down and talk to one group of people, because you'll find value in that. I love what you're doing.
And I was just thinking there, like it's very possibly single moms who are struggling, particularly with boys. Well, thinking boys, but and they it's like, what would a father do right now? Because I'm struggling. Yeah. And there are, unfortunately these days, a lot of single parents. And yeah.
So that's interesting. So so don't be afraid to niche down. Like you're doing. I love your niche. Like you're like a niche and then another niche.
Yeah.
Like you're going right down to that area. And the big thing too is when we talk about the title of our podcast, is you want to make sure there's something in there that's searchable in the name of our show.
Yes.
Right. So if I have the Dave podcast, what is that? Yeah. What is that? What is that? Who is that for? Yeah. And as I'm scrolling through my listening app, looking at all these podcasts, the Dave podcast shows up. I'm like, I have no idea what that was about. Tree planting? What is that?
Yeah.
Ping pong? Is that ice fishing? I don't know what that is.
Yeah.
No idea. But if I have something in there that just kind of qualifies what the show is about, it could be the Dave podcast, everything you need to know about antiques. Okay, well, there you go. Now it's the Antique Podcast. If I love antiques and furniture, that's my show. So I like how you kind of did that with your show. You had a name, but then you kind of just went one level more. Yeah. And you have a little bit of more searchable words in the name of your podcast.
Yes.
That just kind of helps people find your show when they go to whatever search engine they go to. So that's smart.
And that wasn't my wisdom. I, as part of developing my intuition, I meditate daily. And usually I'm doing guided meditations, and I've got a couple of fairly full-on deep ones that I listen to maybe once every 6 months. And it was one of those mornings where I had that really full-on one going, and it just came to me like it was just something spoke to me and just said, you need to change the name of the podcast and add that one word in at the beginning, intuitive. So I take no credit for it. It came. The universe had my back. So, it came from somewhere, and it was like, yeah, okay. And it was like, yeah, that's quite appropriate. Like, how did I not think of that, So. Well,
the one thing you can take credit for is you were open to make that switch. So you could have shut that off.
Yes.
And said, no, but you were open to it. So you can take credit for that because that's your action. I love that. It's smart.
Yeah. So, and that's the thing too. Like, I know when I was contemplating starting the podcast up, the coach training development I was doing, they had a 2-hour taped session all about starting a podcast. And they were talking, one of the things they said, like about coming up with the name for your podcast, is it appropriate to change the name down the track, and they just sort of said, just start, just get the thing going. That's the biggest thing. Momentum, get it started, come up with an okay name and change it later if you want to. Like just do it. Don't sit and wait till you come up with the perfect name.
Yeah. I was listening to an expert in podcasting as well. I listened to a lot of podcasts about podcasting like this one, and I was listening to someone else talk, and they said, go with a pretty generic, bland, kind of simple name for the name of your show. Don't get too crazy. But then in your episode titles, go nuts. Do whatever you want. Because that's the searchable things that are also going to help support the show.
Right.
So answer questions that people are going to be asking through the titles of your episodes. So if I'm going to go and type something about men's intuition, when you go to Google and you start typing men's intuition or something about men's intuition, Google will autofill, kind of guessing at what you're looking for. Those are potential topic ideas for your show.
Right.
Because people are typing those into Google on a search for something about your topic. Yeah. So whatever Google feeds you, those are popular search results around men's intuition. So take those and make those into questions in the title of your show. So men's intuition, how to find it. Or men's intuition, what is it? Like something about that. Make that the title of your show and then answer the question in your content. Yeah. And then that's something searchable as a result when somebody goes to type that in next time. Guess who shows up? Doug's podcast.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's right there.
Yeah. You know your way around this space, don't you?
The other thing I would love to encourage you to do as well, you talked about books around men's intuition. Go to Amazon and look for all the men's intuition books that have come out.
Right.
And just do a search on those. Audiobooks and physical books, ebooks, and then reach out to those authors.
Yep.
You can read the reviews
Yes.
of what people have said about those books and look at the reviews that are between 2 and 4. Drop off the 1s and drop off the 5s.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because they're kind of extreme.
Yep.
Look between 2 and 4. 2 means that I would have given it a 1, but there was something in there that helped me.
Yep.
And 4 is I would have given it a 5, but there's something missing, so I gave you a 4.
Yep.
So what is the thing missing?
Yeah.
And then answer that question in your podcast. I would have bought the book from Doug, but Doug didn't answer this question about men's intuition, and I'm looking for this answer.
Yeah.
Take that question that wasn't answered in that specific book and make podcast about that.
Yeah.
Because there's a resource in the world that didn't answer the question that somebody's looking for the answer to. And you could be the answer to that. Also, reach out to those authors and bring them onto your show.
Yeah.
They're your subject matter experts.
Yes.
With a book to promote, they're looking for people to talk to. Just look for that. And the other one I use too is Google Alerts. And I can set up a Google alert around the name of my show, the topic of my show.
Yep.
And it comes to me in an email every day.
Yep.
Here's what people are saying about men's intuition.
Yep.
I get an email. I can look at it. Sometimes it relates. Sometimes it's just a mess. But there's stuff in there where there's a new article. There's a new story. There's a movie. There's a television show. There's an actor talking about my thing. And it gives me more information that I don't have to go search for. It just comes to me every day in my email box. And I can just filter through and go, that's good for me. That's not for me.
Yep.
And I just have a little folder in my email, and it's just my topics.
Yep.
Anytime I get a topic idea that comes to me through a Google alert, I just move it into my topics and I just put it away. And then when I'm at those days when I'm not really feeling inspired, I go to my topics folder, click on it, and there's all the things that caught my attention recently. And then I go through that, and that's a source of content for me as well.
Yeah. Yeah, something I'd noted down here to, quiz you about was time-saving things, and you've shared quite a few already. That's brilliant. Yeah.
Being organized is probably the best way to save time.
Yeah. Well, 7 podcasts, you got to be organized. Like you just have to have a system. Yeah.
Well, one of my systems is below my screen. I have the name of the podcast I'm on right now.
Right. Yeah, good point.
Sometimes I'm like, oh, yeah. So I start referring to a different show.
Yeah.
And then my guest gets this look in their eyes like, what podcast am I on?
Yeah. So, Doug, tell us about your book. And they're like, I haven't written one yet, Doug. Sorry, mate. Yeah.
What instrument do you play? No, that's a different podcast.
Yeah.
So, I have to make sure that I'm really focused on which podcast I'm on right now.
So is that a physical sticker you put on the bottom of the screen, or is it?
It's like a little sticky note thing on the bottom of my, so I know which one I'm on.
Wow. That's not silly either.
Behind the scenes, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Well, my wife and I are actually, we're about to start another. So I'm going to have 2 podcasts where how long ago was it? 25? No, probably nearly about 30 years ago, we came up with the idea that we were going to sell up everything. We were in our late 20s and go and build this little scuba dive resort on this tropical island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Yeah, it was pretty much 30 years ago.
That sounds like a movie, by the way.
Well, we've actually had someone ask us to buy the movie rights, or like a couple of years ago. Yeah, already. But my wife's always wanted for our grandchildren to write a book about what Grandma and Grandpa did. But it's if you've never written before, it's hard. And so we just decided, well, like, how are we going to preserve this for posterity, like this information? And so we've come up with the idea of doing a podcast of her just going back and forth. And it's all about the emotion of the thing as well, because we've got very different views on daily things that happened. Because our kids were all quite small back then. And, this happened, that happened, and da. And so she's going to give her view of what happened. I give my view. And we had thoughts years ago of writing a book like that, of she would do a page, I would do a page about the same thing. So you would read my wife's version of the event, and then you would read my version, which would be radically different. They say opposites attract, and that's, with 39 years of, next week of, of being very different, but we get on very well. And, so we're going to do, I've got to be organized and do that. And that one is going to go straight to YouTube. So our videographer son's setting us up with, we've got the right microphones, one each hooked up to the camera, and we're going to have the camera and we're going to sit, and we're just going to sit and talk and converse back and forth. And because she follows a lot of people on YouTube who are homesteaders and all this sort of stuff, or they've moved to Alaska during COVID and they're living off the land. And there's a lot of husbands and wives just sitting and talking, out in the garden and showing all their pumpkins they've grown. And, so the advice for being organized, but, going to have two podcasts that are very different. Soon. So
a tip for you then, posting them to YouTube, is to make sure that when you do your episodes, you can put them into a playlist, they're called. So, when you go to YouTube and you see a video you like, you can click on a little save button, and it'll put it into a folder, like a playlist on YouTube. Put all your episodes into a playlist that you load up to YouTube. You can actually convert that playlist into a podcast on YouTube by giving it the name of a podcast. It's only going to be on YouTube. It won't be available on Apple and Google and all that other stuff.
Yeah.
But you can actually make it into a podcast. But one thing that's a great bonus about posting to YouTube is YouTube does the subtitles across the bottom of the screen when people watch videos, right? Mm-hmm. That's your transcription. That is free with every upload that you do to YouTube.
Right.
Off to the right-hand side of your screen, there'll be a little transcription.
Oh, okay.
You can download that.
Really?
Those are your spoken words now in written form, which could become your book.
The book, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Chapters of your book, portions of your book. As you speak your words, YouTube grabs them and turns them into actual written text. And then you're not going to start with a blank page.
No.
And you don't have to pay anybody to transcribe your podcast.
Yep.
It's free.
Right.
Just grab it, download it, put it into a Google Doc or to whatever documents you use.
Okay.
And now you have the bare bones of your book that you can go and start editing right from there.
Interesting. Yeah, great advice.
And it's free.
Yeah.
It's free too.
Nice.
Because that's expensive. If you want to pay somebody to transcribe your words,
yes,
it's a lot.
Yeah.
So I use that for mine.
Yeah.
It really works well.
Nice.
And it's pretty accurate because it's powered by Google. So they've got some good AI technology in the background that are picking out your words. And you have to do little tweaks here and there, but for the most part, even gives you timestamps too.
Right. That's handy.
So you can jump to different parts in your conversation by clicking and you can continue there. So it really works well.
Yeah, actually, yeah. I wondered how people sort of get all that info there, the timestamps and that, they have like dozens of them in there and, Right.
Yeah, so I tell my guests that come on my podcast, when you guest on a show, create a playlist of you being on other people's podcasts. And every time they show up on YouTube, just add them to your playlist on your page, on your YouTube channel, and put them all into one location. And then you have your words on my show. Download those words, and that can be social media content. That can be a new chapter in a new book that you want to write.
Yep.
That could be stuff that you could share on your social media channels. Those are your words. They belong to you as a guest on my show. So don't just come on a show and then never reference it. Pull your words down and use them for your own sake in the future as well.
Yep. Okay. Yeah. Excellent advice.
So do you have a timeline for starting this new show?
At the moment, we're waiting for a part for the camera to arrive. The microphones arrived now last week. We did, like literally a year ago, we did 3 little mock episodes just to see how we would go, whether we would flow or whether we would argue or whether we would interrupt each other. And it all went very well.
Good.
So, yeah, and we do, for the first 6 or 10 episodes, we really do need to get our finger out and have specific things to make it start out. And we will always have something in it that if you really want to, if you just, it's not I guess you could just, after we'd done 20 or 30 episodes, you could just start listening in. But if you went back to the first one or two, it'll really set a platform for what this is about. Because, I mean,
nice.
For me, it's about inspiring people to do things. Because we had 3 little boys under 7, and we sold everything. I was a professional firefighter. I resigned from that. And because we were moving overseas for an indefinite period, I was able to, I'd been in the fire service 10 years. I was actually able to cash in my, what we call in Australia, superannuation. I think in America it might be called a 401k, your retirement benefit.
Yeah,
I was able at 30 years of age to actually cash that because I needed the cash to build this scuba resort, plus what we got from selling our house and all that sort of stuff. We packed up and moved the whole thing, so we burnt our bridges and we just went and did it, because we were still so young. We were we were still in our late 20s when we actually packed up and physically moved. And we just decided we're young and energetic enough that if it all went bad, that we could move back to Australia and start again.
Yeah.
And that didn't happen, but we knew we could start again. And we didn't fortunately have a phase. So to me, it's a very inspirational story. But from my wife's side, she wants to bring in the day-to-day emotions, the elation, the down, it was an amplifier being over there. Like it amplified every emotion. We had no television when we were over there. No, like if you rang anyone in another country, it was a 2 to 3 second delay. Telephone calls were $3 a minute. You just, it was mail to Australia or the US was 14 days always, like either way. It was just communication with the outside world was challenging. Fortunately, you could fax, back in the fax machine days. That was efficient. There was it was a very emotional thing. And there was a small group of expats there that we got our support from, and we all supported each other. So there's some great stories in there. So, yeah.
Love it. The nice thing, too, is some legacy for your family as well.
Yes.
To hear the stories again, your kids can listen, your extended family can listen.
Yeah.
And we all kind of get a sneak peek behind the scenes of what it was like in that experience. And you get to share that and document that for your family. That's another bonus of podcasting.
Yeah.
To know that your sons are listening to you as you share your thoughts with the world. And when you take a break and they reach out and say, get back on the mic, Dad. It's kind of nice to know that your family's listening, right? Yeah. And hearing a different side of you outside of being the dad, now they can hear your podcast. It's kind of cool.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's amazing. And I know you had a few other things you had written down possibly to chat about. Is there anything else that stands out to you that...
I was going to say, how often do you release episodes? I know you talked about this specific one, 2 or 3 a week. You were telling me earlier, but what about your other episodes?
Yeah, Living the Next Chapter has 3 a week that I do. That one I'm recorded. I have enough recordings right now to the end of the year.
Wow.
Like finished, but I have a limit with my hosting site every month. So I have to, I can only upload a certain amount, but I have more episodes recording coming up than I have time to upload.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I have interviews scheduled all the way into October right now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you could probably upload them if you paid more.
Yeah, it'll be a lot more because I'm at the maximum right now. I'm at like a super users level, and that's as far as I can go without having to call their service department and ask for an upgrade.
Yeah.
So I can't afford that. But yeah, so those 2 podcasts are 3 a week. Dad Space is weekly. I have the Add to My Playlist podcast where I talk to musicians. That's weekly. So they're all basically weekly except for 2 that are some reason 3 times a week. So.
Yeah. And how much research do you put into the people you're going to interview?
I always do a pre-interview with everyone.
Right.
And that builds a bridge of trust between the guest and myself. they're not meeting me for the first time, and that little bit of awkwardness of I don't know you, and I don't know where you're going to go with this, and a lot of my guests have never been on a podcast before.
Right. Yeah.
That's a different level because they don't know microphones, they don't know sound.
Yeah.
So having a pre-interview helps me hear and see them before I actually hit record, so that I can address the dog that's barking in the background or the loud cafe that you're meeting me in right now. Like, why are you in a cafe?
Yeah.
You know, I always do my interviews in a cafe. Well, I can't hear you over the espresso machine behind you. You know, it's like, oh, you know, so I get to have that interaction with them. And it also kind of sets the stage for a good conversation.
Yes.
Because I leave that pre-interview, I have time to think about them, go over their book, go over their story, and make some ideas and some questions because we've had this interaction. And they also have a chance to kind of think about the show before they show up.
Yeah.
So that's one of my biggest things that that works for me. It doesn't work for everyone, but for me, that really helps me to kind of show up in a unique way with curiosity because I've had a chance to interact with my guest ahead of time.
Yeah,
So
and
that really
I hear you there because I've done that and I've not done that. I've just researched the person as much as I could, and then we're straight on cold. And the first 10 minutes is challenging. You know, it's like pulling teeth, and then it warms up, and then so it's like, and now I'm 35 minutes into it, and we're starting to flow, and it's great. And I'm thinking, I've lost so many people here at the beginning because they've listened to the first 5 or 10 minutes, and they're like, there's no energy here, you know? So, no, I get you. And so that instead of spending time reading about people and trying to develop questions, you're spending some of that time with the person, starting to create the energy between the two of you already so that tomorrow or 2 weeks' time, it's going to flow better. There's, like you say, there's that trust. There's already the walls dropped. And, great.
So, and that for living the next chapter, that podcast is 20 months old, and I've had 265 episodes.
Wow.
In 20 months.
Yeah.
So I heard one person say on a show that if you're going to have an author podcast, you have to read the book. Well, there's no humanly possible way that I can read 265 books in 20 months on top of doing 6 other podcasts.
Yeah.
So what I do is I research the topic of their book or more about them. And so if we're going to talk about men's intuition, and that's what your book is about, then I'm going to go study men's intuition. So I can ask you thoughtful questions about what you're a subject matter expert in.
Yeah.
I haven't read your book, but I'm here to support you in your book and what you're here to talk about. And that's my job.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my approach to that. It's a little different than some other of the author podcasts that are out there.
Yeah. Oh, I hear you. Yeah. No, that's great. I'm just looking through. You've answered a few. We've talked about some of the stuff I had written down without me even looking at it.
Good.
Time. Yeah. No, that's. Yeah. No, you've hit it all on the head anyway.
Well, as a fellow podcaster, Doug, there's people listening to this show, thinking about starting a podcast, trying to figure out their niche, trying to figure out their audience, their topic. Maybe struggling like you mentioned earlier about maybe they've been podcasting for a while, but they just hit this little pause in their show and it's been a few weeks and for some reason they're just not on the microphone like you experienced. Any motivation that you have from your perspective to people listening to this right now at all these different stages, just on showing up as a podcaster, creating content, any motivation that we can give them today?
Well, with my journey of helping men develop their intuition, it's, in a way, it's selfish because I want to develop my intuition more. And the more I talk about it, the more I talk to other men or women who are interested in the topic and are versed in it, the more I learn about it. So I have had to for self-motivation at times, I've had to just have this healthy selfishness where it's like, well, if I record this with my voice and then I listen to it a couple of days later when it's released, I will benefit from it. And at first, I started listening to my podcasts feeling a bit weird because I was actually really enjoy listening to them. And I can go back to one that I did a year ago and pop it on. And I get something out of it, whether it's me waffling on for 20 minutes or me interviewing someone for an hour. Either way, I'm learning. So it's like, that's my self-motivation some of the time to, get up, get a new topic, get on with it. Because my whole thing with my life is to develop and become a better person myself. And that's how I'm trying to help the world, by making me better. And just me talking it's putting it out there. And I'm, the way my brain is wired has changed through the years. And part of it is through doing this, I think, speaking. And I guess as a sideline, if other people out there, one of them, 25 of them, 25 million of them at some stage in the future, listen to the podcast and pick up a couple of gold nuggets here or there and better their lives, well, that ripple effect will benefit me as well. So to me, and that all sounds very selfish, but I had to look at it that way. It's like, well, yeah, it is great to be benevolent to help other people. But if you're out trying to improve your life and help yourself not in a narcissistic way where it's all about me, but, if there's benefits for others in what I do, then that's my self-motivation, I guess, which is not one I've learnt from others, but I've sort of started to realize we are all selfish. And so I'm going to try and use my selfishness to help others while I'm helping myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I love the idea too, that there's only one person who can do your show, Doug, and it's you.
Yeah, that's right.
I can't do your show. I haven't lived the life that you've lived. I don't see the world through the same lens that you have, because you have lived your life. You've met the people you've met, read the books you've read, studied, lived all this experience, and you're the only person who could do your show.
Yeah.
So when you're sitting there thinking there's too many podcasts about my topic, and how am I going to find my niche? How am I going to find my audience? Just remember that no one else can do your show. No. And if you don't do your show, it's never going to happen.
That's right.
Find power in that. Find your authority in the sense that you are the only person that can do your show.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
So, Doug, I have one more question for you at the end, but before I do that, promote your show again, tell everybody where to find it, and maybe where to start. Like, where should we start listening when we come to your show for the first time?
Where should you start? Well, it's called Intuitive Conversations with Doug. I've got about roughly 80 episodes out there now. Where should they start listening? Well, I guess if you're a man and you are sort of thinking, is this I'm still thinking this is half a feminine thing, but I'll listen to one episode. There's an episode in there, it's called The Intuitive Iron Man, and it's with a man called Trevor Hendy, and he was the 4-time world champion, 6-time Australian champion, surf life-saving champion, and he's a man's man. Like, he came to my house and I interviewed him. He lives 45 minutes up the road. He's probably 6'3" or 4". He's in his 50s now, but he'll teach you ocean swimming. Like, when you start talking to that man about intuition, like, he's a man, and he will rattle on for hours about the depths of intuition and how he used it to win races and all sorts of stuff. So at the end of that one, if you're a tough sort of guy, have a listen to Trevor, because he does 98% of the talking in that one, and he's amazing. It's a 2-part. It went for like an hour and 3/4 or something like that. So I cut it into two shorter episodes. That's a great spot to start. Or if you're listening, depending when this one comes on, this week, my latest one is with an Aussie lady called Michelle Lee. She's the first woman ever in history to row from Well, she rode from Mexico to Australia in a boat. She took 280 days, the first female to ever do it. And
wow.
Talk about someone who's into intuition and stuff like that. I do warn you, she swears like a trooper. She's a true Aussie spirited lady, very spirited. Yeah. And that interview goes for an hour and 55 minutes. And I don't usually talk that long with people, but this an amazing woman, 280 days on her own, unassisted, wow. Except wow. When she would ring out. No one could ring her. She had to ring out on her, sat phone sort of thing. And she paddled for like 11 hours a day, rowed across the ocean, in a 23-foot long boat. She had all her food, all this freeze-dried food, the story is insane. So that one comes out this week. So where are we now, Dave? Right now it's mid-August 2023. Yeah, that'll probably be episode 81, Michelle Lee. Okay. Yeah, that's two amazing people. And that's a thing too, I've reached out to some amazing people and they've accepted and they've been on my podcast. And I've reached out to other amazing people and I don't hear back from them. But, that happens. Get used to that.
Amazing. Okay, so one of the questions I have out to my listening audience right now for the How to Podcast series is I'm inviting them to leave me a voice message on my website. I have a little speak pipe thing where you can click a button and record on your phone or the website. But I've asked a question of my listeners, and I'm going to ask you if you can answer this question for me as well. And what I'm doing is asking them to respond to my question with their answer and at the same time promote their show. So tell me the name of your show, which you've already done, which is great, and that type of thing. So you get to advertise your podcast and answer my question at the same time.
Sure.
So that's kind of what I'm doing as my little thing. So I'm asking this question of all my listeners and my guests. If you had one call to action at the end of your podcast where we end the show and we ask our audience to do something, what would be the one call to action that you would have? Because sometimes I hear call to actions, there's 10. Mm-hmm. Follow me on Twitter, do this, do this, do this, do this. That's a lot of stuff to do. Yeah. You're only allowed to have one. What would it be at the end of your show? And why is that question important to you? Or why is that call to action important to you as a podcaster? So what would you ask and why is it important? So there you go. That's my question to you.
The call to action, I guess, would be just keep listening to the podcast because it's for the variety in it. You can follow me on all the socials, whatever. I don't really care, to be honest, because I'm not that into socials, but the podcast is me. That's it. Listen to the podcast, subscribe to it. Bang.
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Intuitive conversations with Doug. That's it.
There you go. That's exactly it. There you go, everyone. That's how you do it right there. Doug showed you. Doug, it's amazing. Thank you again for making the podcast. Thank you for returning for 2. I'm so happy to have you on. When the book is ready down the road, I want you on Living the Next Chapter with your lovely wife.
There you go.
I can't wait to listen to your other new show when that starts. We'll have the 2 of you come on and have you as guests here as well. I hope that we get to talk many, many more times in the future. And I just find you to be one of those joys in my calendar when it pops up that I get a chance to talk to you. This is a good day. So thank you for making my day today.
Good. My pleasure, Dave. And it's the feeling's mutual. It's the beginning of my day here. It's just turned 7 a.m. And this is a great way to start the day, I can tell you.
Excellent. Everyone, please go support Doug and all of the great things he's doing. Give a listen to his podcast. Share it with someone as well. Make sure somebody knows about the podcast and leave a review, follow, do all the things. Support Doug and the great things he's doing with Men's Intuition. It's an amazing podcast. Thank you, Doug, for being here.
Thanks, Dave. Really enjoyed it.